This is Street Knowledge with Chris Graham.
Welcome to the podcast. Chris Graham and Jerry Carter talking here on a Monday, and we're going to do a little bit of an NFL draft wrap. There's really only one guy I want to talk about because I'm not much of a draftnik. I figure teams pick players, the players go there, they work out or they don't. I'm more concerned about what happens on Sundays and Mondays and Thursdays than I am about what happens here in the spring and whatever, getting ready for the season. But I say all that, and then, one of the more, I want to say controversial, one of the more talked about picks in this NFL draft was the number 6 pick in the first round by a team named the New York Giants, and they picked a particular quarterback from the ACC, specifically Duke University, that Jerry knows pretty well. And so I thought, Jerry, I got to talk to you about Daniel Jones. And first, your thought when you heard his name called with that number 6 pick, and then let's kind of break down Daniel Jones. I thought it would be great to just get some of your insight into his career. He really has come a long way to be the number 6 pick in the first round of the NFL draft.
Well, Chris, I am so excited that he was drafted in the first round. That was my thought process. I've seen, I'm with you, I do not follow the draft. I don't look at the mock draft on a normal basis. It's just not the thing that I do. But I must admit, with Jones coming out, I did. I was looking at it on a regular basis. I had seen every one of McShay's and mock drafts, and the hair, as I like to call them, the other one. All of them, everybody had them going from the middle of the first round to the end of the first round. And as we said before, we touched base before about how important this is for the program that Jones comes out and gets in a good situation and has some success. And in fact, a lot of people had the thought process that the Patriots would take him with the last pick. And it started flexing back and forth. There were some people saying, the sky's the limit. There were some other folks saying, this guy's not going to have that type of a career. So went into it thinking, I'm going to start paying attention after the 10th pick and see where he goes and hope for the best. And I knew that Duke would have some players that would get selected, or not selected, but signed as free agent afterwards. But the Jones would be the one that would get signed. Because I was so bummed. Not that he went to the Giants. I really did think that he was going to go to the Giants with the 17th pick. But it was a situation when they took him with this pick 6. I just immediately thought, no, this is not going to be what we hoped for. And the situation, because of the great quarterback class where they had the 6 quarterbacks still in the first round, and sadly it was Marino that went 6 of the 6. It was a situation where people still talk about that, and that's been 3 decades ago, about the 5 quarterbacks and how they all paled compared to Marino. And I don't think that Haskins is going to have the career that Marino had. But you're in a situation now where it's going to be a constant reminder if you does anything other than play lights out, they're going to compare him to Ryan Leaf. It's a tough spot. So it was great that he went 6, but wow, you're thinking this is all anybody's going to want to talk about. When the winners and losers on every draft column is all going to say the same thing. The Giants made a mistake. And that's the last thing that I wanted to see happen. So the good news is he went in the first round. The bad news is everybody is going to believe that the Giants reached by taking him there.
So here's what I wanted to talk to you about particularly is, knowing the history of Daniel Jones so well. For a lot of our listeners out there, they're not going to know a lot about Daniel Jones except for what they've heard with the talk about whether or not it was a reach. And, of course, it seems like the consensus is it was and whatever. Now at this stage, the pick's done, and he'll have a chance to develop it in New York. We'll talk about that in a little bit. But the history of Daniel Jones, I think, is interesting. This is not a guy And I'll kind of equate him a little bit to, say, a DeAndre Hunter or a Ty Jerome, UVA basketball players who weren't looked at when they came out of high school as being NBA draft picks, much less first-round picks, much less guys who would leave school early. Daniel Jones also technically leaving school early. He'll graduate this spring, but he would still have a year of eligibility left if he had decided to stay at Duke because of a redshirt season. So, but when he came out of high school, he didn't have first-round draft pick written around his his evaluation forms and such. Take us into the backstory a little bit about Daniel Jones, where he came from and how he got here.
Chris, that was exactly right. He was going to high school in a school in the Charlotte area and was generating zero interest. There was one Ivy League school that was remotely keeping an eye on Jones, and it was a situation to where his coach kept thinking, hey, this guy's got some talent. This guy can play. I must be doing something wrong. And with Coach Pratt up the road, knowing his history of being a quarterback whisperer, if you will, he sent him tape, not to try to get cut to offer him the opportunity, but so that he could look at the tape and tell the high school coach what he's doing wrong. How could he get this young man an opportunity to play college football? And that's how it started. And then once Coach took a real solid look at Jones as a quarterback, he told his high school coach, hey, that's okay. You don't need to talk to anybody else about him. And it ended up, he ended up accepting coming there as a preferred walk-on, which meant there was no scholarship. And then it quickly became a situation to where once he got there, he was able to get a scholarship and start his career at Duke.
And so he does that. As his career developed, it seemed like there was starting to be some talk about, hey, this guy's got some talent. He's a big guy. He's 6'5". He's got a good arm. He's got a coach in David Cutcliffe, who is a quarterback whisperer, at least has a reputation of that. Coaching a couple of guys named Manning will help with that reputation. Some Duke signal callers who've gone on into the NFL with similar humble pedigrees as Daniel Jones. But I'm remembering, Jerry, and this is vague, and I don't have the transcripts or anything else, but when you and I started talking last fall about things popping up. I mean, I think when Daniel Jones announced that he was, making himself available for the draft, I don't recall that you thought, because I think our conversation was more along the lines of, wow, is he making a leap here to even think about going to the NFL draft, or maybe taking another year and developing even further to get himself in position for a better run at the NFL, maybe in a year from now. So that's sort of my memory of this. I mean, again, since he got to Duke and since he's been under the tutelage of Cutcliffe, he has developed to a point where at least NFL seemed like a realistic possibility. But man, he really came on here in the last year or so.
So it was really the only person you could possibly compare to the young man coaching quarterbacking the Buffalo Bills right.
Yeah.
And it was a situation to where, when the talk last year about where he was going to get drafted, people couldn't get past the fact that he only played at Wyoming. It wasn't a real football school. It wasn't. He hadn't competed against big-time defenses. It was a situation to where he can't possibly be ready. And then the people who were pro his development were saying, well, not only did he do that, but look at his arm and look at the fact that he didn't throw the ball to anybody. He didn't have anybody that was going to go up and make the ridiculous catch or go out and change their game to the next level. So the thought process would be, wait, if you matched him up to where he could have top-level talent to throw the ball to, that it would be a huge difference. And where Jones was concerned, that was one of the things in the draft. it's tough for me because I like the receivers that he was throwing to, and T.J. Randy, for example, it was a situation to where I think that Randy, he was one of the ones that signed a free agent contract. I'd like to think he could play in the NFL. He's very similar to Jamison Crowder, who played for Duke and now plays, this year he plays for the New York Jets. So it's a situation where Jones is concerned that every time somebody wanted to say something nice about him, it was a situation where there was somebody saying something equally as distant, and people wanted to point out from his senior year the game against Clemson. And that's just not realistic because everybody looks like that against Clemson. It's from an offensive standpoint, when you're running for your life just to throw the ball, and the reason that he had to throw so many, and I smile about this because it drives my wife nuts when they're throwing that quick slant. They're throwing that quick slant where the receiver's on the end, and he's 2 yards behind the line of scrimmage. Why do they keep running that play? And she asked me, it's because they can't stop the defensive line. And that was one of the problems that Duke had. It was being able to keep him upright to allow him the time to throw the ball downfield. So here's the thought process. The detractors are saying he can't throw the ball downfield. The people that are, pro him are saying he didn't have the time and he didn't have the receiver. So then you're sitting there in the process going back and forth. And the thing with Manning, and I'll say Peyton first. There's a great similarity, Chris, in athletes for me that I grew up really like. One of them was from the Valley in Virginia. That was Del Curry. Mm-hmm. And Del Curry, there's a number of people that I met over the years there that would tell me that Curry was a better pitcher than he was a basketball player. There were people whose high school careers were made by the fact that they got a hit off Del Curry. Mm-hmm. And it was a situation to where I love Del Curry. And it grew into Del had a couple of sons. And very similar for me, Archie Manning was my first football hero. I just felt bad for the guy. The guy never had an opportunity to play on a quality team. He never had a situation to where he had a chance to experience great team success. And down the road, it was a situation that I automatically loved his son. The same way that with Del Curry, with Manny, I bring Manny up because while he's going to learn under Eli, Chris Peyton Manning, I didn't understand what 6'5" in the NFL looks like until I had the opportunity. It was up against the Ravens. We went up on a Sunday and watched. As much as I followed Peyton Manning, I had never seen Peyton Manning in person. And we had good seats. We're right behind the bench, and it was a situation. My takeaway wasn't what he did against the Ravens. My takeaway was, wow, that dude's big. It's funny as you see, and you and I have talked about you covering the ACC tournament. You don't understand just how athletic somebody is until you're watching them perform just a few feet away. Mm-hmm. And it's a situation with Peyton. I'm sitting there going, I get it now. I get why the fact that people talk about the prototype body, the prototype build. So now you've got Jones, and he's in a situation to where he has the ties to the Mannings, and the Mannings. Hunt didn't just coach them in college, and that was it. They still do things with him. They still participate in his camp. When Peyton was trying to recover and earn his way back into the NFL after the neck surgery, he did it in Durham with Hunt. And it was a situation to where the naysayers to what Hunt has accomplished, you're in a situation to where, well, yeah, he had these two guys, but I could have coached those two guys. And you're sitting there in the mindset going, got to get one. He's got to get one. And each time that somebody would be a starting quarterback, he would maximize their abilities. And Sean Rinfrey actually came back from an injury and played in the NFL, and he was the backup for the Falcons behind Matt Ryan. And of course, you and I know my history with Thad Lewis and the brief stage he had with various teams. And he now is toughing Chip Kelly with UCLA versus playing. But to continue the mindset that this guy can take somebody. And let's go back to our conversations about UVA with what Tony Bennett did. This group that's all waiting to go to the NBA, they did not come there NBA ready. They were in situations to where Kyle Guy was Mr. Basketball in Indiana. But it was a situation to where they were solid players. And DeAndre had a little bit more hype coming in. Situation to where Cutcliffe was concerned, you take what Jones had, the 6'5" frame, and he took it and he taught him how to play the position. And this was going perfectly for the long-term health of the program right up until he went number 6. And now everybody is forced to talk about how big of a mistake it is.
and so now I'll weigh in editorially with this observation. And Jerry and I both said at the beginning of this podcast, we're not draft nicks. We don't live, breathe, sleep, drink, whatever else, 24/7, 365. Arm strength of quarterback A versus quarterback Z, etc. I do say this though, NFL teams have a lot invested in their scouting departments, their player personnel departments. They do send guys out. They'll send guys out to watch games. They'll send guys out to practices. They send guys to the Senior Bowl. They have these players in for individual workouts. They're at the combine. They're at Pro Day. I mean, they've evaluated these guys a million times in person, on tape. They talk with each other to make sure that it's not one guy's bias outweighing, whatever else there might be at factor here. And so, what I love the most, and I say that cynically, is if you click on any sports website, an ESPN website, and The Athletic, any other sports website, their draft analysts will give their grades of the draft. This draft that concluded on Saturday, they'll now give their grades. We have not played a game with any of these players yet. They haven't even gone to minicamp yet. Most of them have signed contracts. A lot of them haven't signed contracts yet, though. And we won't see them in game action. I mean, a lot of the guys, the defensive players, a lot of the offensive players will actually play as rookies. I don't suspect that Daniel Jones will play as a rookie. I don't think that he was drafted to take over for Eli Manning this year. I think he's got a great situation. He's going to be an understudy for at least a year, I would assume, under a guy who plays football very similarly. Again, we've talked about how they were coached in college by the same guy. Eli Manning goes back to Duke every spring and works with Coach Cutcliffe, so he sees him as enough of a mentor to want to use him to fine tune what he does every spring to get ready for the summer and the fall. So for Daniel Jones, ideal situation. He doesn't have to come in and take over right away. He doesn't have to be Kyler Murray. All the pressure in the world on a guy like Kyler Murray, maybe on Haskins in D.C., a place where they lost their starting quarterback, Alex Smith, to injury. They don't have a lot of money left in the salary cap because of the vagaries of salary cap, making it hard to go out and get a free agent quarterback. So the Haskins kid at Ohio State quarterback is going to have to go step right in probably and be able to play right away. I don't know that Daniel Jones is going to have that pressure. I doubt that he does have that pressure. So, but that said, the idea that the Giants don't know what they're doing, given how many times they've had to have contact with Daniel Jones, how many times they had to have had contact with David Cutcliffe. Before we grade this draft, before we grade this draft pick or any draft pick, let's see him play a couple times before we see that. Before we say anything. That's sort of where I come with this. That all said, I mean, on paper, maybe they reached. Maybe they should have waited till 17. But the Giants GM insists that there were two teams, and the Redskins did draft a quarterback ahead of them. The Dolphins traded for a quarterback after the draft was over. Former first-round pick Josh Rosen. So, maybe there were other guys in the market for Daniel Jones, and you take what you do with what you do with your pick, what you think you need to do with your pick, and I got no problem with this. I'm actually happy for the kid, and I'm happy for Duke football. Jerry, you and I talk Duke football an awful lot on this podcast. I'm happy for the Duke football program because what a benefit to recruiting for David Cutcliffe it is to have Daniel Jones as a number 6 pick in the draft. That'll make it a little easier when he's out there making pitches to young men, high school sophomores, high school juniors. Hey, I got a guy who was first round pick of the New York Giants playing quarterback. I want you to be my guy. That might help get a guy in the door next time he makes that kind of a pitch.
Well, it's going to be really interesting because what did happen? I'm sitting there and my phone app goes off throughout the sports world, and especially during the draft. And that was truly the only thing I was interested in the entire draft. So I just wanted Jones to go mid to late round, first round. I wanted him to go to a situation where that he could learn, and there wouldn't be a ton of pressure on him. And it kind of didn't work out that way. But then, now the Giants GM is got to have as much pressure on him as anybody in the NFL that's coming up season. You're in a situation where you traded Odell Beckham Jr. And again, the only fans that I think are more famous for their lack of patience than the Giants fans would possibly be the Eagles fans. So you're in a situation where you've already traded away a guy. I'm going to call him a social media megastar. It's a situation where Odell Beckham Jr. is a talented ball player. I don't think he's as talented as he's made out to be, in the fact that he's fighting a lot of injuries. And people don't take that into consideration. I thought the Giants made a solid trade. They were already on the hook for trading away one of the quote-unquote best players in the NFL to Cleveland. So now, when he's trying to defend this pick, and that's all it's going to become now, is defending this pick, he then tells the New York Giants fan base the one thing they don't want to hear. Well, he's not going to play for 2 or 3 years. Well, they wanted Eli gone, and again, Eli is Archie's boy, so I pull for Eli a great deal. They wanted Eli gone. So now that you've told your fan base we're overpaying for our pick, but we're going to keep the guy that you guys all want gone for a couple of more years. And the further that he talks, the further into the process, I'm just going, please stop. And then the next comparison, when he's talking about the 2 or 3 year plan, he's talking about comparing it to Brett Favre and Aaron Rodgers. And I'm sitting here going, okay, if we don't have enough things to overcome with this pick and all of the hype about this pick, it's a situation where now we're comparing Jones and Eli to Aaron Rodgers playing behind Brett Favre. Mm-hmm. So you're in a situation going, okay, this guy can't win, and I see what he was saying there, but Brett Favre was a 1 in a million player. He was larger than life, had a phenomenal career, and I don't know how Aaron Rodgers at worst, is the 3rd best quarterback in the modern day NFL, and I think he makes the top 10 and across the board from what he's been able to do. So when you're sitting there and you're trying to defend your pick, I don't know that the go-to thing was, it's okay. To Eli and Jones, the comparison is to Brett Favre and Aaron Rodgers. I'm not sure I would have went there, but that just feeds the fire that much more to where that they put somebody under the magnifying glass. And again, like you said, they haven't played. They haven't even had a workout. They're in a situation to where they clearly felt like he was the guy, and it's going to be interesting, but it just, I would have rather had done it a little bit more of maybe sneaking in the back door versus feeling like that it's going to be magnified. Now, if it works, the Giants GM is a genius. If it doesn't work, then I think that there'll be a new Giants GM pretty soon. I think that's safe to say.
I'll go ahead now. I'll bring in a couple of the UVA draft picks. In fact, there were 2 UVA players drafted this year. That haul will get more extensive in the next couple of years with the first crop of true Bronco Mendenhall recruits coming through. But 2 guys heard their names called over the weekend. Juan Thornhill, first I'll mention. He was a second-round pick of the Kansas City Chiefs. And 3-star recruit out of high school. 3-star recruits becoming second-round picks. That sounds like another guy on grounds at UVA, turning guys who were afterthoughts on the recruiting trail into big-name players. Tony Bennett and what he's been doing with UVA basketball the last several years. But Thornhill, when I say he was a 3-star recruit, he was actually more regarded as an offensive recruit. He was the 1A Virginia High School League quarterback of the year when he came out of high school a few years ago. Played safety in high school. But at 6 foot tall, 205 pounds, ends up playing defense at UVA and really grew into his role over time. I mean, again, a 3-star recruit. He actually had I think he tied for the highest vertical leap in the combine. He ran a 4.42 40 for a safety. And it just seemed like, now he was recruited at the tail end of the Mike London era. He really adapted well to what Bronco Mendenhall and his staff wanted to do, and also benefited greatly from the staff's emphasis on strength and conditioning. He's a test case, a great test case for what UVA has done strength and conditioning wise since the Bronco Mendenhall group got on grounds. The other player drafted, Tim Harris, went in the, I think it's the 6th round. And Tim Harris is 6th round. He was taken by San Francisco. Tim Harris is one. Now, he was a 4-star recruit out of high school, but he was so far back in high school, he was not only recruited by the Mike London staff, he actually played against BYU, coached by Bronco Mendenhall in 2014 as a true freshman, true first year at UVA. He played against that tough schedule that London had that year. He had UCLA, he had BYU, among others that season. And Harris was a stud recruit, 4-star recruit, who suffered 2 season-ending injuries. Actually had a 6th year granted to him. 2018 was his 6th year at UVA. And so, he turned athletic pedigree, being a 4-star recruit. He overcame 2 early season-ending injuries in 2016 and 2017, and then had a 2018 that got him recognition enough to get drafted. And I'll say it too, it's really hard. I mean, you're 6 years out of high school, so you're 24 years old. You've had 2 season-ending injuries, so you got a couple strikes against you as far as the NFL. You've got, you're older, so that's 1 year, less year of quote-unquote upside for a guy. And also, you've had those 2 injuries to have to overcome. And so, but you know what? The kid worked his way into it, and for both him and Thornhill worked their way into this. When Tim Harris was recruited, a 4-star guy is someone looked at as if the coaching staff wherever he goes to school doesn't screw him up, he should be a draft eligible, draft pick kind of guy. But he had to come through those 2 season-ending injuries, and then Thornhill just totally played himself into the NFL draft, and a 2nd-round pick at that. So I just feel great for both those guys, and for this, and kind of like we talked about with Daniel Jones, Jerry, for the UVA program to have these 2 guys picked this past weekend is something that will resonate with recruits as Bronco and his staff are out there on the recruiting trail pitching to mamas and daddies to say, come to our school and we'll turn your kid into an excellent young man and a good football player.
Absolutely, and it's so much tougher. The average person, the average fan, doesn't spend a ton of time dealing with the draft. Now, I have two exceptions to that in my life. A dear friend of ours out here, Ben Pennington, he's such a Seahawks fan that he could tell you the life story of the third string guard for the Seahawks. And even my son-in-law Josh is somebody that eats it up from a process, again, the connection to the University of Georgia, about the draft. And you talk about the talent difference in the elite football school versus the good football schools to the middle of the pack football school. It's insane. You know, and by comparison now, you saw that Clemson, quite the contract they just give Dabo, and good for Dabo. But when you're sitting there and Clemson and Georgia and Alabama, it's not a matter of counting your draft picks. It's counting how many were first-round draft picks. How many players on your defense are going to play in the next level? So it's a situation to where that's where the margin of gap in between college football really shows. And that was a point you brought up a few months back about playing football in the ACC. Right now, you're in a situation where you're playing to try to get to be opposite Clemson down in Charlotte.
Yeah.
You know, I don't see anybody that's going to close that gap anytime soon. And going to Kansas City in the second round, again, Andy Reid has a little bit of a knack for developing players who fit into a system. I think that's a great opportunity. But, you know, it's going to help. It's going to help when Bronco and his staff are out there. Hitting the road, trying to find the lost treasure, if you will. It's going to make a big difference as far as talking in somebody's living room in reference to, getting someone to come to UVA and play football. One of the neater conversations that I had with as far as parents, obviously I have zero experience of what it's like to have your child recruited. And when Anthony Boone was the quarterback at Duke, a couple of spots before Daniel Jones, it was a situation where I had a chance to talk to his father it was a road game in Memphis, and I got a chance to talk with him, and I asked him, I said, you're in a situation, I said, you turned your son over to Coach Cutt. Tell me what your thoughts were on the process, because you don't want to be singing the praises of somebody that has the answer to something without knowing as much as you can. And Mr. Boone was nice enough to share it, and he said, he came into my house, and he talked, and we talked a lot, and every single thing he said was true. He made no promises. There was no guarantees. It was a situation where my son might have been better off playing baseball than football, but he came in, and every word that he said was true. And he goes, and that's, as a parent, that's all that you want. And Bronco was somebody who had a solid reputation. There has not been a ton of questionable, thought processes, or every school is going to have a bump in the road here and there. But for the most part, people hear the name Bronco. Mendenhall, there's good thought. Hey, look at the program that he ran at BYU. Look what he's trying to do in Virginia. He's going to be able to not only have him go far home in the second round, but to have him go to a place where I think he's going to have a great opportunity to develop a very good team, I think is an added bonus to the Cavs.
Yeah, I think both the programs we talk about here a lot on this podcast, both Cutcliffe at Duke and Mendenhall at UVA, they're good coaches. They could certainly, you could give them the keys to an SEC program and they would win lots and lots of games. But they both seem like the kind of guys, and we know this because they've taken the jobs and kept the jobs that they have. David Cutcliffe could easily be in the SEC. He's been there before. He could be back if he had chosen at any of several points along the last few years at Duke. He could have been back at an SEC school coaching. But they seem to really revel in the challenge of succeeding at a place that, okay, you're not gonna recruit the number of athletes that you need to have to beat Clemson and Alabama consistently. You may have to have a few things go your way in that one game where lightning strikes to have the upset and win that game and do something special. But they can win a lot of games where they are in the ACC. They can put themselves in position. It's good luck for both those schools and us as fans and followers of those schools that they're both Coastal Division teams and Clemson's an Atlantic Division team. So if you win your division, as Jerry, you've seen Duke play a couple of those games in Charlotte, your team can win your Coastal and go play Clemson in Charlotte or Florida State back some of those years earlier on in Charlotte. You do have a chance to get yourself in that game, and if game plan well and things go your way and whatever the case may be, you can win those games. So but football is a sport. I mean, we also obviously follow college basketball very closely. Basketball is a sport with 13 scholarships. You have a couple walk-ons on the end of the bench. Generally speaking, you play 7 or 8 guys, maybe a 9th guy, but pretty much 7 or 8 guys of the 13 scholarships play on a regular basis. That's your rotation. That's the guys that really contribute. Your other guys are there to help practice, help make practices run smoothly and that kind of thing. Football. I mean, you look at the 2 deep in football. There's 22 positions, offense and defense. That's 44 on your 2 deep, not including your return specialist, your kickers, your long snapper. And some of those guys play dual roles, but for the most part, you've got to have, of your 85 scholarship players, you've got to have 50 to 55 who can contribute. And then, of course, even outside your 2 deep, you got to have guys ready to step up because the sport is a violent sport. It's a long season from training camp starting in late July all the way through Black Friday or that weekend in November, and then bowl season after that. So a lot bad can happen, and so you have to have guys step up. But that's a lot of people that you've got to recruit, and so that's why the blue bloods in football have a much bigger advantage than the blue bloods in basketball because, boy, if you're gonna play at the level of Clemson or Alabama or Ohio State on a consistent basis, you can't just have the top 3 or 4 recruits. I mean, like in basketball this year, Duke with the celebrated class of the 3 of Williamson, Reddish, and Barrett. 3 guys can change the whole makeup of your program in 1 year. You get 3 guys in football, you still need 40 to 45 other guys to make you a good football team. And so that's where, when you see what the likes of Cutcliffe and now to a lesser extent, but he's improving the UVA program, Mendenhall can do at UVA. It's a lot of work to be able to compete with the big boys in football. And but I think in both cases, I mean, clearly they're able to do so. They're not going to win. Neither Duke nor UVA is going to go 13-0 and play in a playoff. I say that. I don't think I'm breaking any news there, but they can win 9 or 10 and play in Clemson and play against Clemson in the ACC championship game. And hey, if great game plan and a couple of turnovers go your way, you can beat Clemson, and people will remember that for 50 years afterwards.
Yeah, they absolutely will. And very well said. That was a question where both schools are concerned, especially on the Duke side. Somebody who had the conversation with me and said, well, how can they be so good in basketball and yet suffer so much in football? Well, in basketball, you can do it with 8 guys. You can put 15 on the roster, but you can do it with 8 guys. I said getting 8 guys to be accepted into Duke and play can be done. Getting 44 main players, as you said. And one of the well, the 2 years that I was fortunate enough to follow them start to finish, home and away. Duke is playing a game. They were down in Miami, and for 3 quarters, they're beating Miami, and they're beating Miami comfortably. And it's a situation, come the fourth quarter, in the Florida Heat. Miami came back and did everything they were supposed to do. And my dad was actually at that game with me. He said, explain to me what happened. I said, it's the death. You're in a situation for the average person watches college football because they're pulling for their team. They're not aware, again, who's the backup linebacker. The average fan that doesn't have it at that depth, so you're not paying the same level of attention to it. But when you're playing a game which is that physical, and you're playing it at that level, not only do you need somebody to be your starting right guard on the offensive line, you better have somebody behind him that can play in spots to where that you have the strength and the durability. You see everybody holding up their 4 fingers when the fourth quarter starts. That's what it really shows. It really shows that the difference in when you realize that the 7th linebacker versus the 7th linebacker at Alabama is better than any linebacker that's playing at Duke. Then they kept trying to make it more fair. They kept trying to shorten it up. Okay, you can't give a million scholarships. You can only give this many. And then a few years back, they tried to minimize it again. I don't know what the actual number is right now. I wanted to say it was between 70 and 80. But that was one of the reasons that schools back in the day, per se, like Nebraska, could just stockpile talent.
Yeah.
Not only were you get the top 3 offensive guards out there, but you got the 6th and 7th one too because they just wanted to play for Nebraska. If you grew up in the Midwest, that's what you wanted to do. So they keep trying to make it a more competitive, balance. It's just not going to happen when your good teams are that good, and you have that many players, and you ask them, especially if you are trying to recruit somebody who can afford to go to school on their own. So you ask that person, hey, would you rather go to would you rather go to the University of Washington and possibly never really be a factor, or do you want to go to Montana State where you can play? And the bigger schools, the top-end schools, just continue to gobble up so much talent that I don't know that we're not all going to be looking up to Clemson for quite some time.
So we've reached the point in the podcast, Jerry, where we'll say, Jerry, update us on, you follow particularly women's sports really closely, the women's college basketball game, of course, but that season's over. I guess we're heading now towards the WNBA season. Anything else jumping out at you from the sports context that you think deserves some airtime here?
The first thing I have to think about, and where the game, the basketball game, again, the difference in the game between the men and the women is insane. But the situation about just thinking about how much men's basketball has changed and how many things we're experiencing. A new one right now, and we touched on this with the Gonzaga top 4 players all said, hey, let me take a look. UVA's top 4 players all said, hey, let me take a look. Duke actually has 5 players saying, let me take a look. And they changed it now to where it used to be you could, quote unquote, take a look, but if you sign with an agent, you were done. So, again, trying to make it more fair with the situation where they've changed that again this year to where now you can sign with an agent. And as long as you say, hey, I'm not going by this date. You can still come back. So the first thing that sticks out to me is I understand why they're doing it, and I understand that it helps the current player, but I don't know that it's not hindering the high school player that's taking a look at college. You're in a situation where most kids that have that solid of a game are wanting to play. They're wanting to play. And if you go to a school where there's somebody ahead of you and possibly two people ahead of you, it's going to be a little bit more difficult to say, I want to go there, even though I might be the third best small forward on that team. So if you're a high school recruit and you're sitting there, it's great that the college people have so much more ability to take a sneak peek and get the free advice. I think that has to have an effect on the high schoolers that are looking at what school that they're going to go to next.
You know what? I'm not even sure if it has as much on the high school player as it does on the coach that has to either – I mean, I'll use the example of Kyle Guy. Now, he has now since said, at first Kyle Guy left it out there, I might come back. He didn't say it that way, but he left open the possibility of coming back, and then about a week later said, nope, I'm staying in the draft. I think that's fair to Tony Bennett. I mean, obviously you'd love to have Kyle Guy back, but if he's 50-50 or whatever percentage on whether or not he's coming back, if you're Tony Bennett, you're left in a lurch because do I have a scholarship still to give to somebody? Do I have a spot to give to somebody? Or do I want to try to find a guard? And if Kyle stays in the draft and we get into May, there aren't going to be players out there to offer scholarships to. And so, you know, that whereas that high school kid, that 4 or 5 star recruit, he's going to find a place to play. It might not be at UVA, it might not be at Duke, but he's going to have suitors out there looking for him to play. Whereas the coach and that player's teammates who haven't, the kid who hasn't decided, am I going to go back to college? Am I going to stay in the draft? He's kind of tying up a lot there with that. So yeah, that rule, I love the idea behind the rule, the intent behind the rule. It's certainly good for that player, but it's probably not good for his teammates, certainly not good for his coach or his program, that there is that uncertainty up until May 29th, the way the rule is right now. So, yeah, that really hurts. That really hurts a lot of people around that. And so, you know, in the context of Kyle Guy then, and we still have Mamadi Diakite still kind of hanging out there right now. Unless you're, say, Mamadi Diakite's case and you maybe already quietly told Coach Bennett, I'm coming back. I'm just wanting to test the waters here, see what I'm told I need to work on, et cetera, et cetera. Then there is no uncertainty. But if there is uncertainty on that player's part, that throws a lot up in the air for your program going into next year.
Absolutely. And if anybody wants to ask what's the main problem that Duke is having right now, it's not the ability to land the star. It's building around that. And when you're in a situation to where you're flipping, I know that there's 12 to 15 people that could be affiliated with a basketball team, but in most schools, you're dealing with a rotation of 8 or 9 players. And you can offset somebody leaving early. But what Duke is doing, what Duke is going through, is they're in a situation to where they're having to flip half their roster each time. And when you're recruiting a player, that's now something you've got to ask yourself. Do I think I'm recruiting a 1-year player? Do I think I'm committing it to a 2-year player? It just has changed the game dramatically. And some of the signings that's taken place already. I'm going to draw a blank on the young man's name. It was number two recruit, been non-committed. There was a lot of question, a lot of, hey, where is he going to end up? And after we watched the mad exodus of North Carolina, that's an easy one. He signed with UNC.
Oh, Cole Anthony, Greg Anthony's son. Yeah.
Yeah, and so you're in a situation where the next one, what people talk about how non-spectacular next signing platform. That changed once everybody acknowledged that they're going to go. All of a sudden, you've got 4 of the top 50 because they see that they have an opportunity to go there and play. And it's another phase in how the game has changed, the same way that transfers change the game, and then graduate transfers change the game. And then, Chris, the one it brought me to, and I apologize in advance if I mispronounce his name, Johnny Juzang.
I'll go with that one too. So we'll both mess that name up, I'm sure.
I did not think I would live long enough to see somebody narrow their choices down to Kentucky or UVA. I just did not see that day coming, and that's what's going on here. And we talked about it. We talked about it at length with what Tony Bennett was going to do going forward. And you have to lump Duke into it as well. It's easier to be mad at Cal at Kentucky, but if a ball player is going and signing with Kentucky or Duke, the general thought process is they're not staying there.
Right.
They're not in a situation to where they're going to stay there. So, what is your take on one of those players now having UVA in one of the final 2 spots?
Yeah, it is interesting. I mean, it's Tony Bennett. It was a year or 2 ago. Explicitly said, "Hey, look, I'll talk to those kids because." I think when he was talking about that deal a year or 2 ago, it wasn't a matter of I'll ever realistically be able to get one of those kids to even think about UVA. But, he didn't rule it out when a reporter asked him that hypothetical. In this guy's case, from what I've read about him, he comes from a family background that would indicate, even if he is a one-and-done player, he goes to a prep school that sends its kids to Harvard and Yale and, really, really well-heeled schools, if you want. The kids who don't play basketball. He doesn't go to a basketball factory school. He goes to a school that happens to have a top recruit playing for them at their prep school. But if I remember right, it's something along the lines of his mother and father, like one's a doctor and one's a professor or something along those lines. I mean, so it comes from a family background with that kind of background. So if UVA is ever going to be in the market for a one-and-done kid, this would be the one-and-done kid they'd be in the market for, a kind of young man like that. But, and it is, though, it's sort of a sign of the times. Tony Bennett redshirted DeAndre Hunter 2 years ago. DeAndre Hunter plays 2 years at UVA. He's going to be the number 4 or 5 pick in the draft coming out as a redshirt sophomore. I don't know that you'll see Tony Bennett redshirt a guy anymore. I mean, there's talk about Kadeem Shedrick, who was a 4-star recruit from North Carolina, had a lot of buzz coming out of high school. Some folks are trying to suggest he'll redshirt at UVA. I think Tony Bennett's learned his lesson. If you're going to get anything out of a guy, you might as well get something rather than nothing. A redshirt year is just totally wasted. If a guy comes out with the kind of pedigree that Shedrick's coming out with, just like Hunter coming out of high school 3 years ago, that redshirt year is just wasted. Even if all you get out of them that first year is 6 points and 5 rebounds off the bench, at least it's something. And so, but Tony Bennett inherited his philosophies on that from his father, Dick, and Dick coached D3 ball for 20-some years before he got his first shot at Wisconsin Green Bay and then moved up to Wisconsin and then had those couple years out at Washington State before he handed the reins over to Tony. You develop players. That's the Bennett model has been you develop players. You develop them slowly, and by the time they're juniors and seniors, they're ready to play. And that's not the way college basketball is played anymore. So, but I say that about Juzang again, though. I'll just reinforce that. If UVA is ever going to be in the market for a one and done or a two and done, if whatever the case would be with Juzang, if he came to UVA, he would be the one they would get, a kid who comes from a a well-heeled background, a school, an environment, family environment that seems to emphasize education. Oh, by the way, he just happens to be really good at basketball. But yeah, it is something. I mean, it's a different era when Tony Bennett is associated with a kid whose final choices are UVA and Kentucky. I agree with you, Jerry. I don't think I saw that ever coming.
Well, I did have those were the first two. My third at the end of the podcast thought was, I know you had your head buried in your project where the book is concerned, and I'm anxiously awaiting to see the book. Tell me the thing that stuck out the most in writing the book that you didn't think that much about until when you wrote the book, and you're done, or helped write the book and you're done. What was the thing that came most into focus with you about the year that you wrote about? What was something that stuck out that when you put pen to paper, you're going, hey, that's big. Well, what was that item for you?
Well, at writing the book, we're working with, it's a collaborative effort. Jerry Ratcliffe, of course, the longtime sports editor of the Daily Progress. He'd been there for more than 40 years and had a career before that, even before he started there. But I think he started at the Daily Progress back in '79. So he's known UVA sports since I was in second grade. And Jerry is sort of connective tissue, if you want to say. That's kind of the way I'll put it about Jerry. Not only what goes on the court or on the playing field, but knowing what goes on behind the scenes. And then we've been fortunate. Jerry's son Scott has contributed to the book. Scott German's contributed to the book, and Zach Peerless, who's been working with us the last few months, Northwestern grad, who's got a bright future ahead of him, has been working on the book. So what I've been sort of doing, I've been viewing myself. I mean, I've been writing, but I feel like I'm more of an editor of what we did with the book. Was all the great stuff that we wrote for Augusta Free Press, all the great stuff that Jerry and his group wrote for the JerryRatcliffe.com website. We've been melding that into one cohesive story whole. I don't want to knock some of these other books. I've seen a couple of the other books, quote unquote books, on bookshelves. I saw one this past weekend. We spent the weekend in Virginia Beach, and I saw the Daily Press book that was out. They're more magazine type things. They're game recaps, just kind of put in a different form. We're actually writing a book, and so we're actually telling a story from start to finish. I guess what I would say, me personally, I'm more of a numbers guy. I don't get too much into the personal stuff. I don't get too much into that connective tissue type stuff. I'm more of a here's what happened on the court, and I'll tell you as well as anybody what happens on the court, what might happen in the next game on the court. I'm an X's and O's guy. I'm a numbers guy. But the strength of this book is you've got me doing that, but then you've got, I think what Jerry's strength is, and I think to a degree Zach too. They're just great storytellers, and they really did a good job this season talking about some of the things that have nothing to do with X's and O's, have nothing to do with whether or not you do a hard, whether or not you emphasize the hard hedge on a pick and roll or you switch on screens. I mean, that's the stuff that gets me going, the coaches kind of thing. That gets me going. Some of the stories about how this team not only overcoming the UMBC game from the psychological standpoint, the individual players, the team as a whole, but the team building activities. It seems like from talking with a number of the players and coaches, and this was something that was really great. The access to the Final Four was really great for this kind of storytelling. There was a whitewater rafting trip that we write extensively about in this book that happened this past summer, where anybody out there listening, if you work for a company that does these kind of team building things, rope courses or whitewater rafting or whatever, team building activities, take a day off and go do some team stuff. This whitewater rafting trip apparently was a big deal for this team in terms of building up the guys building trust in each other. That was something that really was emphasized There was another thing that we devote a lot of time to in terms of something, again, that had nothing to do with X and O's, not even game planning, but folks will remember that UVA played Duke on a Saturday night in JPJ, lost that game. LeBron James is in the house. A lot of folks are there for that game. UVA loses that game on a primetime Saturday night, and then less than 48 hours later, they're at North Carolina, the biggest stretch of the season. I mean, you got two teams that a lot of folks thought were Final Four worthy. Certainly, they were Final Four worthy. They just didn't happen to get there, but they were Final Four caliber teams. And you play them within 48 hours of each other. You lose the first one to Duke, and now you got to go to Chapel Hill. Carolina had played a day game at home on the Saturday, so they're not having to get off a plane, get off a bus, get out of a hotel. They're just sleeping in their dorm rooms. And UVA's got all, it was a pretty tough stretch. UVA won the game against Carolina after losing to Duke, and a lot of the folks around the program say how important that game was. That was the defining game of this season. If they don't win that game, maybe they don't play as far as they do in March and into April. So one thing we write about, I'm kind of giving something away here, but I'm giving it away to people listening to a podcast an hour in, so congratulations to you. But there was a rousing game that Sunday, and Coach Bennett, instead of doing a walkthrough and going into game planning and everything else against Carolina, I mean, a pretty good team. Instead of all that, he had Franco Baldacci, who is a pretty good piano player. We got to hear him at the April 13th event at Scott Stadium, the welcome back to the team, the celebration of the championship. He played One Shining Moment live for the 20,000 plus in attendance. No pressure there. You got to play it live. Can't warm up. Just got to go out there and play. Tony asked Frankie, to put together a list of songs to play Name That Tune. And instead of doing a walkthrough, instead of doing shoot around, whatever else, they played Name That Tune. And what a lot of players said was that Coach Bennett this year really relaxed. Like in the face of, boy, the pressure of having lost to UMBC, here you are, number one team again, and you're expected to do all these things. They emphasize whitewater rafting. Let's play Name That Tune. Let's play. They would play rousing card games. They would play Scrabble. I mean, they would do things like this to just kind of ease the tensions of that, and how important that was. So, I mean, I think you'll learn a lot about this team, a lot about Tony Bennett in this book that will tell you that there are a lot of ways to win a basketball championship, but this is one that you wouldn't have thought. I mean, Tony Bennett really did some interesting things to win this championship, and that's, for me, putting all this together the last couple of weeks, helping put all this together. It's been interesting learning just what goes into building a championship team. It's recruiting. It's X's and O's. It's making sure they're doing their strength and conditioning. It's a lot of things. But it's also some of those things that could be really key behind the scenes.
Very well said. And I'm looking forward to reading through my copy that much more. And being that we've come full circle and we're back talking about UVA basketball, I just wanted to finish. I had touched on this a couple of weeks ago that, Tony Bennett sat down with Coach K on his radio show. Closing thought process. Here's reading a quote. For all the credit we're going to give our players, I want to tell you they won because you coached them and you were fantastic. And you've been fantastic for our sport. You, as a coach, are so deserving of this national championship, so enjoy it. And congratulations to you and your family and your program. And I was sitting there, and that was after the two of them had Coach K was talking to Tony. When you're going through this, it really does, at a time where college basketball, if they ever needed a feel-good story to kind of combat all of the things that have gone awry, it really was. And it's come full circle, and I am anxiously waiting to get to read the book when it makes it out to me. So it's a situation to where it's cool because not only are they national champs, but they're national champs for at least another 300 days, right?
That's right. That's right. Yeah. And I think that's well said as we close. College basketball with all the scandal going on, these trials and the money talk, the illegal money under the table. Yeah, college basketball definitely needed this feel-good story. So we're glad to be a part of it in the sense that we've got to follow it closely, and now a group of us is working together to help tell that story even more in depth behind the scenes. So, well. For Jerry Carter, I'm Chris Graham. Hopefully this was a good podcast to listen to. Thank you for listening and joining in, and we will sign off. Have a great week, everybody.